Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Bay of Bengal Dialogue series. We have a very, very special guest today here, whose work I have been personally following, particularly in the context of geopolitics in the South Asian region. He is Michael Kugelman. So, Michael, welcome to Bay of Bengal Dialogue conversation series.
Thank you. Great to be here with you.
So, if you could briefly tell us your current affiliations and the kind of work that you do, particularly focused on South Asian region.
Sure. So I, for more than 20 years now, have been an analyst of the South Asia region, in particular looking at U.S. Policy and U.S. relations with the countries of South Asia. I also look very closely at the geopolitics of South Asia itself, with particular focus on this country, Bangladesh, as well as India and Pakistan, and really the broader region as well. And most recently, I've been with the Asia Pacific Foundation as a senior fellow, contributing to research along those lines.
So you, of course, have followed the July uprising here in Bangladesh very, very closely. So what was the reading in the foreign policy circle in Washington, D.C. during the July uprising and also post-July uprising, how the situations unfolded? There is a lot of discussion and talk about reform, but also a lot of people would be very cautiously optimistic, especially with regard to reform and in the also backdrop of the evolving geopolitical scenario in the region. So how is being read in the foreign policy circle during July uprising and post-July uprising?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind in this regard is that Bangladesh, unfortunately, has not received the strategic focus in Washington as deserved. So in that sense, a lot of people were caught completely by surprise when all of a sudden you had this mass mobilization and you had this terrible crackdown, and then suddenly you have this long-serving leader leaving the country. And I think many in Washington, in the foreign policy community, were left thinking, okay, where did this come from? What happened? And there's a lot of questions. And it's a fairly small number of Bangladesh watchers in Washington. I'm fortunate to be one of them. And so I found myself just having to explain a lot of basic issues to many in Washington. So in terms of the reaction, I think that on the whole, there was this view of just how remarkable, certainly how tragic it was, of course, with the hundreds of deaths. I mean, that's what stands out the most. But I think that what many in Washington also looked at was the victory that this story represented for youth politics in Bangladesh, in the sense that, of course, South Asia on the whole is very young demographically, right? You've got countries where in most cases the median age is in the 20s. That includes Bangladesh, I assume. But youth activism, youth politics are, for whatever reason, oftentimes suppressed. But in Bangladesh, of course, a country with a deep legacy of activism, including youth activism, the fact that you have young people leading this mass movement that topples a dictator and then results in some young people taking on roles in the new governments, that really resonated in Washington. But I do think that as time went on, you had that honeymoon period, the first few months afterward. But then I think that there started to be increasing, concern about what was coming next. And, my view certainly has been in recent months, a sense that, okay, there were tremendous expectations of the interim government. The interim government had very ambitious goals, including this major reforms process. And, it's now 1 year later. And I think that there's a sense of, well, what's actually happened? And when I was last here in January, conversations with people suggested to me there was a level of unease and impatience about what was coming next. So I think that now, the view in Washington on this whole story 1 year later is that this was a remarkable achievement for youth politics, that you now have this very volatile moment in Bangladesh where there's going to be an election in February, or one is scheduled. We have an economy that's fragile. We have a law and order situation that's a bit unsettled. And I would also argue that in Washington, some concern about some of the actors that have become more prominent since the fall of Hasina, particularly Islamist actors, that type of thing. That's something that gets in focus in Washington as well. But final point on this is that Bangladesh is not a country that gets a lot of attention in Washington, even after what happened last year. And so I wish that there were more people thinking about all these issues now.
Okay. Michael, one of the things just after the uprising, we saw there's a massive misinformation, disinformation, and AI-enabled deepfakes.
Right.
And it's not just during the uprising, also during the spat between India and Pakistan. I mean, deepfakes video generated millions of views within a couple of hours. So should the South Asian government, I mean, it's an issue globally, but more so probably in this region, whether South Asian government should be concerned about, and what should be the way out there, there are certain steps India kind of has taken that are, exactly forgot the term, formulated something, but in Bangladesh and Pakistan, the debate is more about stringent cyber laws.
Right.
So how do you really balance between the free speech and then also making sure information integrity, whether some sort of information compact or is there some thought around that?
Yeah, no, it's a very difficult policy challenge,
Mhm.
and I think there's only so much that can be done to prevent misinformation or disinformation in the sense that people are empowered to generate fake content through AI, as you say. It's so much easier to do that, and I think it's more compelling now for fake news purveyors than it had been previously, just because AI generated images and videos are quite believable. It almost looks accurate, and I think that gives folks more of an incentive to put them out there. So that's hard to stop, right? You can't, unless you completely shut down social media and the internet, which is only going to happen in truly authoritarian states. You have to manage that challenge. So the question becomes, what do you do? How do you better regulate information once it's already out there? And I think one thing that I would emphasize is the issue of strengthening digital literacy, social media literacy, ensuring that people have a better sense. People are equipped with the skills to know what is right, what's wrong, when to be skeptical about fake news, when to hold back from sharing something that might be fake. And I think there's, you have people that can provide that expertise and share that information. I don't think this is an intervention that would work well only in South Asia, but everywhere. Just because, as you suggested, this is a global problem. It's not just a South Asia focused problem. Though indeed we have seen a particularly large amount of misinformation, disinformation coming from the Indian side in particular. The two examples you mentioned and others. But this is a global problem, and I think it deserves attention on global platforms. And if you look at entities like the UN and related places, international organizations that have respect and have clout, I think it's important that they be convening discussions around this issue as well.
And do you also see a political cost of de-escalation if it is kind of widely spread?
Yeah.
And then it's very difficult sometimes to contain, even if the state wants to do it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are political and there are also security implications for this too, right? I mean, to take the latter first, if you have someone post a message that wrongly claims that, say, a religious minority member staged an attack, right? That could then prompt lynchings, that type of thing. I mean, it's horrific, and this has happened in some cases. So there's security dimensions to this as well. But yeah, absolutely. On the political side, the fact that we've had so much misinformation, disinformation from India alleging, wholesale attacks on religious minorities here, in the immediate aftermath of Sheikh Hasina's fall, that contributed to the souring of tensions between India and Bangladesh. There are a number of reasons why relations went downhill, but diplomatic relations can be impacted when fake news runs rampant, so to speak. So I think this is also something that should give pause to those that let this happen.
Okay, great. And in the beginning, you mentioned about how Bangladesh is not really a kind of a priority in DC. Only Bangladesh comes through the prism of India-China relationship or Indo-Pacific strategy during the Biden administrations.
Right.
So US's recalibration in the South Asian region on that in the short run, next 1 to 2 years, what are the three trajectories that you see US foreign policy spans out in this region? And for Bangladesh particularly, what are the kind of few hedgings that Bangladesh could pursue to kind of on trade,
Right.
as well as security, to make sure that Bangladesh pursue its economic prosperity as well as ensure the sovereignty and so on?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that the biggest challenge for Bangladesh and many other countries is how to manage the unpredictability factor associated with the Trump administration, and particularly President Trump. I mean, it's hard to say what he's going to do when it comes to foreign policy. And at this point, we don't have a clearly articulated strategy from the new administration on South Asia, much less on Bangladesh. I do think it's notable that, as you know, in recent days, the president announced that his new nominee to be U.S. ambassador to India will also be a special envoy for South Asia, South and Central Asia. This has never happened before. The fact that you have an ambassador in New Delhi with that title as well. There's never been a special envoy for South Asia before. So, that raises a lot of questions, right? Does it mean that the Trump administration is going to want South Asia policy to be managed from New Delhi? That I think could have some notable implications for the region, including for Bangladesh. I know that one of the concerns in Bangladesh has been that U.S. policy toward Bangladesh would be shaped through the lens of India. I'm not sure that's going to be the case, given that U.S.-India relations are tense right now.
Do you think it's gonna continue these tensions, or there might be a way for India to get out of it through a kind of compromise?
It's tough. I mean, it's the biggest crisis we've seen in this relationship in several decades, and the U.S. has lost a lot of trust in New Delhi, quite frankly. And I think it's one way to solve the crisis is something that's not realistic. And that's India essentially just conceding and doing what the Trump administration wants it to do, making concessions in trade talks, agreeing to stop importing oil from Russia, giving President Trump credit for his role in the India-Pakistan ceasefire. But this is not a government in India that's going to do those types of things. It's not going to give in. So that's going to be tough. I mean, I will say that there will be an opportunity perhaps for Modi and Trump to meet on the sidelines of the UNGA meetings next month, if Modi comes to the meetings. If he comes, it's unclear if the two would meet. But the best way when you have an important relationship, best way to try to clear the air is to have the two leaders meet, and they do have had a good relationship in the past, and so that would be one opportunity right there. If that meeting doesn't happen, and then especially if the Quad summit scheduled to be in New Delhi later this year with the leaders level summit, if that doesn't happen, then I think you really have to expect very difficult times for the relationship. And one final point on this. The conventional wisdom is that even with all the problems in the relationship, it's strategically sound because both the U.S. and India have a shared interest in countering China. But that's not necessarily the case now because India is looking to ease tensions with China, and President Trump has indicated that he wants to try to ease tensions with China. So if they no longer have this strong focus on countering China, well, that could make it less compelling for them to work together from a strategic imperative. But we'll see.
Okay. And one of the topics, Michael, you wrote extensively on the transboundary shared resources.
Yes.
And in the nexus of food, energy, water, and climate resilience, and so on. So specifically for Bangladesh, what could be like two bargains to kind of, whether it's on the data sharing cross-boundary or energy grids and so on, you see there are opportunities for Bangladesh in the coming days to pursue. And what forum could Bangladesh actually to pursue it, given we see India-Pakistan rivalry, and that's often prevents kind of those kind of regional cooperations, right?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're sitting here talking about geopolitics and foreign policy and issues of the moment, but these are the issues that ultimately matter the most, I think, for Bangladesh and its neighbors, because climate change is real, contrary to what some skeptics might say in some corners of the world. And Bangladesh is experiencing this on a daily basis. And in the neighborhood, we've had the latest serious floods in Pakistan. And it's striking to me in that this is a region that's very disconnected, right? I mean, you don't have strong integration, but you do have these connectivities reflected in shared rivers. You have so many shared rivers in this area, and many of these rivers are shared by countries that don't get along, right? Bangladesh being a extreme lower riparian state is especially vulnerable to any actions by upstream neighbors, so to speak. So I think in terms of what to do, ideally SARC would be a platform for the countries to come together and talk about cooperating on countering climate change. But in reality, it's not, because SARC is dead for now, mainly because of the India-Pakistan problem. I think BIMSTEC is the best option. BIMSTEC is something I see as a bit more dynamic than SARC. It's one more active. Pakistan's not a member, so you don't have the India-Pakistan paralysis. I mean, you do have the new challenge of India-Bangladesh tensions. The Myanmar conflict is a problem too. Myanmar, of course, is a member of BIMSTEC. But I think that these are all countries that share these concerns about these shared challenges, like climate change. I think that BIMSTEC is the logical forum to discuss these issues. And for the most part, with some exceptions, the BIMSTEC countries, they get along, they're able to talk, and they've been able to come out with some projects. And you have this recent electricity sharing deal between Bangladesh, Nepal, and India. It was launched just in recent months, I think. So there's the possibility to get substantive things done. But these things can take time. But yeah, I think BIMSTEC is really the way to go.
Yeah. And what do you think about Bangladesh's inclusion in the ASEAN? Of course, that will require the consensus of all member states.
Right.
That's I myself see it very difficult. That's happening with the Myanmar. Of course, we're doing it. But there has been a recent discussions, and there is an effort from the interim government. What are the kind of way Bangladesh strategically could pursue this to have a kind of even as a dialogue partner in the ASEAN?
Yeah. I think that it would be difficult in the immediate term for Bangladesh to actually be a formal part of ASEAN. I'm not sure if its economic performance would be of the type that would be worthy of consideration by the membership. But ASEAN and other regional organizations, for that matter, beyond South Asia, there are ways to contribute that fall short of formal membership, right? I mean, you could have observer status or guest status. This is something that SCO offers. This is, of course, a Central Asia focused entity. But I think that Bangladesh really, because of its geography, it should receive consideration from the ASEAN states. I mean, Bangladesh, it sort of is a bridge, I think, between South and Southeast Asia. So logically, it would be relevant for the ASEAN states. But here, I think that one also has to look at the nature of Bangladesh's relationship with the ASEAN states. Of course, it has its relationship with Myanmar. It's a complex one, but it has them. But Yeah, I just don't think Bangladesh has that presence in Southeast Asia that could make it difficult for it to receive like short-term consideration for some type of substantive contribution to ASEAN. But it's something certainly something to work to beyond the immediate term.
Staying on the regional cooperation topic, and one of the biggest challenge for Bangladesh's foreign policy, as well as it has become a domestic issue as well, the Rohingya issues.
Yeah.
And I personally don't see in foreseeable future is get resolved.
Mhm.
So the major powers are also very divided on this, and there is little leverage from the multilateral forums,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
So how do you see that? What is your kind of thoughts suggestions on realistic pathway for the Dhaka to pursue? I mean, it's both. Also, is there any kind of deterrence toolkit
Mm.
out there that Bangladesh could try and pursue?
Right. Yeah. It's just it's such a difficult issue. You know, I'm struck by whenever I listen to and talk to interlocutors in Bangladesh, including senior officials in the government, I hear repeatedly this reference to the Rohingya crisis is something that is like the worst challenge, the biggest challenge. You know, these superlative terms to describe a crisis that, quite frankly, gets almost zero attention outside of Bangladesh,
Mm.
which is so terrible. I mean, certainly exceptions, the UN and so on.
Has it to do with something with the boss regime, given how they kind of take it as a leverage, often to
Yeah.
bring legitimacy to the
Mm.
to the regime, not necessarily being very proactive on bringing that to the international players' attentions and discussions?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough call. I mean, I think that it's true that the prior regime seemed to use what it described as its humane treatment and solid management of a complex issue as something that deserves attention and legitimacy giving, as you put it. But I mean, Sheikh Hasina, I mean, she did make efforts to put it on the global platforms, at least in the UN setting, so to speak. But I think it's more an issue of just so much going on. There's so many, unfortunately, there's so many humanitarian crises, sort of led by what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Ukraine, but so many others playing out elsewhere in the Middle East, in Afghanistan, in Africa, so many places. And I think that makes it difficult for it to get the attention that it deserves. And it also is, it's something that is generally speaking contained to here, to Bangladesh. I mean, every now and then you get the news stories about these terrible tragedies of Rohingyas dying at sea when they're trying to escape somewhere. But generally, it's a local issue, or at least a regional issue. It's not seen as a global issue. So I think that affects the attention it gets as well. So it's very difficult, I think, for Bangladesh. I do think that Dr. Yunus, as someone who has, I mean, for lack of a better term, star power on the global stage, he's done this already. And he's someone that could draw on his own fame and prominence and respect to try to mobilize global attention to this. But the problem with that is the current global moment is not conducive to that type of appeal, right? I mean, you've got donor fatigue and, humanitarian assistance is down. And in terms of the calls he's made for other countries to open their borders to the Rohingya community, this is unfortunately, it's just not it's not an appeal that works in this day and age. And as you say, I mean, the great powers, I mean, China and the U.S. take different approaches to this. I don't think the Trump administration would have any interest in getting involved in this. So, I think that means that for the foreseeable future, this is going to be Bangladesh's challenge. It's going to have to, along with Myanmar, it's going to have to work it out itself. I would just say this: if you're trying to figure out ways to bring more attention to this issue, link it to something beyond a humanitarian crisis. Link it to the broader geopolitical state of play. Link it to the security concerns on the border. Link it to this very unusual reality of having a violent non-state actor controlling almost the entire border with Bangladesh. You don't want to securitize a humanitarian crisis, but at the same time, it may help to sort of provide that broader picture that goes beyond the humanitarian side as well.
Yeah. And so China's interest with certain corridor in the Myanmar, and then India has also import
Right.
For its strategic interest. So how that kind of plays out with U.S. interest in Myanmar, given how conflict has transpired in the last kind of a year and a half?
Yeah, I mean, we don't really have a sense as to what the Trump administration will think about great power competition. It really depends on what the administration thinks about competition with China. Does it want to continue waging that competition? The conventional wisdom is yes, but Trump has signaled, as I said before, a willingness to look into better ties with China. India is also trying to relax its tensions with China. Myanmar is not going to be a country of concern for the U.S. I mean, certainly it might want to look at it through, those lenses that this administration likes to look at the world through, one being critical minerals and rare earths. And that might entail a willingness to engage with the regime in Myanmar in ways that the previous U.S. government might not have wanted to do. But I'm not sure. I mean, these China-India maneuvers that you're discussing, I'm not sure how much that's going to register as a concern, or even something of import for the administration to look at.
So realistically, does Bangladesh have any leverage at all, at least to stop the balance? Because we see there's influx of people still continuing.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
You mean regarding the border?
Yeah, I mean, so the conversations that Professor Yunus tried to
Yeah.
kind of bring into the discussion with the major players is to safe return, right, for them.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a big ask.
Right.
So, what are your thoughts? I mean, of course, there will be in a kind of, we don't know exactly when, but there will be an elected government.
Yeah.
And Professor Yunus is trying to use his global image and connections to bring attention to the issues.
Mm-hmm.
So, what could Bangladesh in the short run, interim government could take to make sure that this violence stops?
Mm-hmm.
And the second was create some of the conditions for the safe voluntary return of these Rohingyas from Bangladesh.
Yeah, I mean, for the latter, the issue of safe and voluntary return, I mean, a lot of that depends on factors that are generally beyond Bangladesh's control, and that really means the situation in Myanmar, right? I mean, if the violence doesn't get under control there, it's clearly not going to be safe for Rohingya refugees to return if they're willing to return. I think that the current government, the interim government, has made very clear that repatriation is the solution, even if it doesn't happen right away. Given the track record of the belligerents in Myanmar, I don't necessarily think that they could be trusted to provide assurances of safety to Rohingya that might be there now or that might be going back. I don't know how much leverage, quite frankly, Bangladesh would have in that regard, right? I mean, it tries to be very careful about how it engages with the regime in Myanmar. I mean, obviously, it has equities. It has good reason to be practical about keeping open channels of communication with those in power there. But then again, it's got the Arakan army controlling almost the entire border. That can't be overlooked either.
Yep.
So by having to balance between those two entities, the government in Myanmar, the military, the Arakan army, that might deprive Bangladesh of leverage over all of those entities just because it's trying to spread out its relations, so to speak, and it might diminish any leverage it might have over any one of those actors.
Yeah, I agree with most about what you said. There's actually little leverage for Bangladesh to kind of at this point. On insulating some of the regional cooperation from crisis, so often what we see that India-Pakistan shock events derail the entire agenda for other countries. So is there kind of concrete guardrails to protect at least financing of the projects and infrastructure projects and so on? I'm not sure if that came into your radar. As very recently, Bangladesh probably has closed down few land ports. So how should kind of Bangladesh think about whatever happens, that on connectivity issues and regional cooperation issues, that it can continue?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I see this infrastructure binge in Bangladesh in recent years. The previous regime was very focused on big mega projects, but this infrastructure is not really transboundary. It's domestic, and so I think that that clearly has been a limitation for Bangladesh. I think going back to BIMSTEC, I mean that seems to be the best pathway. I mean, you had Bangladesh working with several other BIMSTEC states to come out with that electricity sharing deal. That's great. That's good. So I think that certainly is a platform to continue to engage on. And I think it's unrealistic to believe that we could see, trans-regional or completely regional connectivity projects just because the India-Pakistan problem makes that unreasonable. But, I'll say this. There's a sub-regionalization trend in South Asia now. You have two different components of this. One is the BIMSTEC, or maybe not BIMSTEC, but eastern parts of South Asia, oftentimes involving BIMSTEC countries to work together to look at infrastructure projects. And then you have the western part of South Asia where you have Pakistan looking to work with Afghanistan to develop projects focused on hastening access to Central Asia. Bangladesh, in theory, has the capacity to be involved in both sets of those types of projects, right? I mean, it's already in working with BIMSTEC countries. And then we've seen this resurgence in Bangladesh's ties with Pakistan, which I think might provide an opening for Bangladesh to look into possibilities to partner with Pakistan and Afghanistan. It's a bit more ambitious than the BIMSTEC realm. But, as I think that at least in principle, there's scope for working with both components of the sub-regionalization dimension. And it's not something that most countries in the region can say, that they could work with both manifestations of the sub-regionalization.
Okay, great. So moving forward, Michael, what are some of your thoughts with regards to overarching Bangladesh's foreign policy, how you see it kind of unfolds in the coming days, and what should be the kind of priority, primarily with keeping the Bangladesh interest first?
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, of course, what comes to mind always is the India issue, right? Bangladesh has these tensions with India. India is a very important country in the region. How to go about that? And I think that if we look at the future, we really have to look to the elections. My sense, it seems to me that this government, the interim government, is a bit cautious about taking any major steps on the foreign policy front. You recall that meeting in China some weeks ago where you had a senior Bangladesh diplomat meeting with senior diplomat from China and Pakistan. After that meeting, the Pakistan and Chinese foreign offices were celebrating this as the beginning of some new regular trilateral mechanism. But Dhaka was much more measured in its reaction, which suggests a hesitation to do anything that could be perceived as like alliance-like behavior, for example, and also perhaps a recognition that could hurt ties with India. So we have to wait to see what the next government wants to do. I don't want to speculate about what the next government will look like, but I think there's a fairly good chance that regardless of who leads the next government, there's going to be a desire to try to patch things up with India, recognizing the important economic security interest involved with that relationship and the importance of patching things up. I suspect that India would probably be comfortable working with the most likely elected government we get from Bangladesh. I mean, assuming it's one led by the BNP. To be very candid, India's main concern is Jamaat. That's its main concern. So,
but what has been the biggest concern for the India right now, or reservations right now, to kind of do any sort of cooperation with the interim government?
Yeah, well, I mean, there has been engagement, right? I mean, there's been, we did have meetings between the foreign advisor and India's external affairs minister. So, this is happening. But I think for India, it's really like a shock factor. I think India is still reeling from losing maybe its closest friend in South Asia, right? Of course, she's now in India, where she'll be for the foreseeable future. But I think it's still recovering. I mean, it put all its eggs in the Sheikh Hasina basket for so many years, and that's left it with nothing. And I think beyond that, India is concerned about the space, the political space that's now been provided to the religious actors, to Jamaat and other Islamist actors that, in India's view, are hostile to India. So India's view is that the interim government, rightly or wrongly, is allied with those factions, and then it's enabling them. That's what it worries about the most. So this is why I think if you have an elected government that is led by BNP or other forces that are not Islamist in nature, the Indians would be willing to try to patch things up. And I think India certainly is concerned about Bangladesh's signaling that it wants to make things work with Pakistan. But getting back to your question about Bangladesh's best foreign policy, keeping its own interests in mind, it's the mantra from independence, and this notion of malice toward none, friendship toward all. I think for political reasons, post-Hasina governments might not want to articulate that mantra, but I think that's basically still the modus operandi, non-aligned foreign policy. And in that sense, I think what would work best for Bangladesh is balancing its relations with both India and Pakistan. It has this opportunity to do that now that it didn't have during the Hasina era. So hopefully it'll be able to patch up ties with India while also maintaining momentum in this resurgence in ties with Pakistan, even though I don't think we should overstate the possibilities for that relationship. There's still a lot of limits, I think, for really resetting that relationship with Pakistan, many of them tied to historical issues. But I think that's best for Bangladesh. Manage its ties with its neighbors, India, Pakistan, China, for sure, and the other neighbors.
So there will be absolutely recalibration, even though if the elected government comes with regard to foreign policy of Bangladesh, right? It's not going to continue as it was before July. That's my personal assessment. But with regard to Indian foreign policy, I mean, with the neighborhood policy, they lost pretty much all of its close allies in the region. It happened in Maldives, it happened in Nepal, happened in Sri Lanka. The last one was in Bangladesh. But you of course interact with a lot of people from foreign policy circle.
Right.
Is there rethinking in Indian foreign policy circle, particularly in the South Bloc?
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily think the view is that India has lost the neighborhood. I mean, yes, I mean, there's always the Pakistan problem, and indeed Bangladesh is suddenly a problem for India. But the other examples you mentioned, I think Nepal is another example. I mean, you've got a pro-China leader back there. Maldives, Nepal, Sri Lanka. You've got relatively new governments led by leaders who are much more pro-China than their predecessors, but they're not throwing themselves into the China camp. They just want to better balance ties between China and India. And as you know, the Maldives president Muizu, I mean, he kicked out the Indian military presence. He signed new defense deals with China, but he has also repeatedly described India as Maldives' closest ally. And I think that these countries recognize that India has leverage because of its economic support, humanitarian support, development assistance. So they can't afford to just jettison their relationships with India.
Mhm.
So India definitely has neighborhood challenges. I think that more so the issue of these new leaders, it's issues like anti-India sentiments, which
Mm.
we've seen in many of the Muslim majority states in the region. I mean, here, though it's not new, Maldives as well as of course Pakistan. That's something to manage. But as India, if it continues to ease tensions with China, then maybe competition will recede in the region, meaning that if you have these leaders that want to better balance ties with India and China, that will be okay with India. It won't feel a need to wean those countries away from their engagements with China, or at least not as much as previously. So it's got neighborhood challenges, but maybe not as deep as it might appear from afar.
Thank you, Michael. And any overarching final thoughts for a new Bangladesh?
No, I mean I've been here several times now since the revolution, and the sense I get is that even with all the challenges and the unease and the concerns about what's happening, a sense that for the most part people just are happier. They feel happier and
Mm.
freer than they did before the revolution, which suggests that what happened last year really mattered. Obviously, if the cost, the horrific, the terrible tragedy attached to that, but also even if the spirit of the revolution is starting to wear off, I think that it still had an impact, a positive impact, given how many people feel today about the general state of play.
All right. Really appreciate, Michael. Thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Pleasure.
Okay.